I'm Kurt Wagner.
And I'm Mike Epley.
We're old college debate teammates who disagree about pretty much everything as often as possible.
In each episode, we examine a question inspired by the week's events.
Despite our disagreements, we're friends. We respect each other, we keep each other honest, and we have fun doing it.
And most importantly, we drink.
Offering a fresh, informed snapshot of the debates that dominate contemporary discourse, this is Right Brain, Left Brain.
Hey, welcome to Right Brain, Left Brain. It's the champagne of podcasts.
That's true, and champagne is delicious and a particularly premium alcohol.
Coming your way from sunny San Francisco.
Yes.
Also known as foggy San Francisco. Yeah.
It is summer here in San Francisco, and this summer has been quite the stereotype.
Yep.
Very, very foggy and cold.
Yeah.
One of the
Coldest winter I ever spent was a summer in San Francisco. I don't remember who said that. It was like Tony Bennett or something.
It's actually a false attribution.
Oh, really?
To Mark Twain.
Oh yeah, Mark Twain. Yeah. I always get him confused.
But he didn't say it. I don't remember who said it, but it's not him.
Okay. Well, fuck that plagiarist, whoever said it.
So if anybody tells you that Mark Twain said that, punch him right in the fucking face.
For Mark Twain. This is for Mark Twain.
You think Mark Twain would say some corny shit like that, you fucking bitch?
So believe it or not, we've had a couple drinks. This episode of Right Brain, Left Brain is brought to you by way of, I'll start, Fireball Cinnamon Whiskey. Alcohol 33% by volume, which is 66 proof.
And because sometimes we're teenagers that have broken into our parents' liquor cabinet, Sky Vodka.
Sky Vodka. I bought a whole handle too. Oh man, we're in trouble.
It was $20 for a handle. We could not afford. See, the thing is sometimes we'd like to live it up, but we're living on your dollar, the Patreon supporter and the advertiser, which means that we have to really think about value.
Yeah, all two of you.
And as it turns out, we got $20 this month from Patreon, so two people at $10 a month is one handle of Sky.
And what are we going to do for the other 3 weeks of this month? We don't even know yet.
We're going to drink that very, very cheap imported Dominican Republic alcohol that was marked off for some reason in cost. I don't know why.
Also, of course,
because it killed those people. That's the joke.
Yeah. Right. Your Dominican Republic jokes are going strong.
Am I late with those? I'm sorry.
Also, of course, we got, what is that? 21st Amendment something, blah, blah, blah.
Yes, that's right. 21st Amendment, blah, 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 IPA.
And then there's always the green stuff, Mountain Dew. And then, of course, I'm sipping on a homemade White Russian and a not so subtle tribute to the dude.
That's right. Vladimir Putin.
Vladimir Putin, the original White Russian. So if you hear rattling around of ice, well, it's because I break the rules. Like Vladimir Putin. So
also receding hairline, like
Vladimir Putin. Oh man!
So also, I think that what we're getting at here is that really this show is co-hosted by Vladimir Putin.
Yeah. Welcome to
trying to drop hints, but now we can't let it out.
Welcome to Right Brain, Left Brain, a production of RT. Cheers.
Hey RT, if you want to sponsor us,
we're open.
We will literally do it for anything.
What if we got sponsored by RT? That'd be so fucked. Cheers.
Putin. Greatest president or just greatest president of Russia? New right brain, left comrade.
Ooh, that's Fireball, all right. I love Fireball. It tastes so good. So thank you to
fake news.
So thank you to our listeners. Without you, we would surely die.
And thank you so much to our subscribers on Patreon. Without you, we would die even sooner than we would die without the listeners, but then also it would be a much worse fate and we would have less money while we die.
Or less alcohol.
Yeah.
And less alcohol.
Which, I mean, yeah, because if we have money, what does it get spent on
Yeah.
besides alcohol?
So a little bit of housekeeping. There are 2 new Patreon episodes up for our loyal Patreon listeners who are like, where the fuck are our episodes? First, we have got, quote, should Trump have released his tax returns? In which I argue that Trump should not have had to release his tax returns. And Kurt argues that he should have. Yeah, it's a pretty weird episode, and you're going to love it.
We also have, is Antifa a force for good? Where Mike argues that there's an ongoing battle between factions on the left for rights to that label Antifa. And Kurt argues that the quote-unquote nunchuck guy already won that battle.
With a swift blow to the head.
Yes. That's how you use a nunchuck, my friend. Swiftly into the brain.
Oh, man. They're both great episodes. You will love them if you contribute $5 or more per month to our little Save the World Through Humor and Honest Debate project. You will get an average of one special bonus episode every month on Patreon. And yeah, it's an average of one show per month because making bonus content is hard. So don't at me about it unless you're looking for an editing gig that pays in hangovers.
But if you like hangovers, like holler.
Yeah, if you love hangovers as payment, holler, because we will provide very competitive hangovers.
But anyways, thanks again to our patrons, and we hope you love those bonus episodes.
So what's going on in the world, man?
Well, North Korea tested some missiles, and Trump in return promised on Twitter that his buddy Kim Jong-un was not technically breaking our agreement since, hey, missiles aren't nukes.
Unless they're launched from Iran, then it's definitely
it's a completely different issue.
Well, now that he has saved A$AP Rocky from the evil Swedes, Kanye West plans to solve the U.S. homelessness crisis through his new brand, Yeezy Homes, which is not a joke, which is prototyping dome-sized homes that could, as Kanye puts it, quote, be used as living spaces for the homeless, perhaps sunk into the ground with light filtering in through the top, end quote. He was reportedly inspired by Luke Skywalker's childhood home on the desert planet Tatooine. No word yet on whether he knows Star Wars is fictional.
Hey, the Dems had another debate. It was kind of similar to the first one, except the theme is more emergent, center versus left. Did you have any judgments?
I mean, I still kind of like Mayor Pete. I'm always a little impressed by his performance. But it did.
As we said
give
before,
me
his full legal name, Peter Buttocks.
Oh yeah,
Judgment.
Peter Buttocks Judgment. We didn't really do an episode on it because A, it happened over a week ago, and B, it really is not terribly different from the first debate. It's kind of like an early episode of The Bachelor where there's like so many contestants. It's kind of still a shit show, but
yeah,
don't worry, we'll get there because that theme of center versus left is really going to play out in this Democratic thing. And it's kind of a debate between Kurt and I and something I'm still thinking about. So we'll definitely come back to that. But what else?
Also in funny, but not funny, but funny news, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell fell and broke his shoulder in a household accident, which is strange because you would think that he would quickly recede into his shell to avoid these kinds of injuries. The Senate Majority Leader is recovering well on a strict doctor-ordered diet of grapes and refrigerated grub worms. But we're not talking about any of that stuff this week. So we're talking about ending mass shootings.
As long as shootings keep happening, we're going to keep talking about them, looking for ways to come together, to understand each other, and to debate real ideas designed to reduce mass shootings in our country.
If you haven't heard, as of last weekend, there were 2 unrelated mass shootings within 24 hours of each other. A shooting in an El Paso Walmart and another in the Nightlight district of Dayton, Ohio. Between the 2 shootings, 31 people were killed and more than 50 people were injured.
Yeah, so of all highly populated countries in the world, the United States has, unsurprisingly, the most guns per capita. We've got 4% of the people on Earth and 42% of the guns on Earth. The country with the second highest guns per capita is Yemen, which was already a crazy motherfucking place even before it was a war zone. But the U.S. has Yemen beat somehow on guns per capita with nearly twice as many guns per person.
God, we really got to up our game.
Yeah, we're fucking, we need 3 times. The U.S. also, though, has the dubious distinction of having the second highest mass shooting rate in the world. And who's the only country that's got us beat? Well, Yemen, the country that doubles as a battlefield. Nobody else on the planet is even close.
And that is an active war zone, so obviously that's not necessarily a direct statistic, but it is to give you an idea.
Yeah.
This weekend shootings are just the latest. Last week, a gunman opened fire about 80 miles from our studio at the Gilroy Garlic Festival, killing 3 people. A couple months ago, the Virginia Beach shooter killed 12, and this is, again, just the latest in a series.
Yeah. Now, while mass shootings make up a minuscule proportion of the total number of gun deaths in the U.S., they are a national reminder of the constant that is American gun violence. As prevalent and as upsetting as gang violence, accidental discharges, and suicides are, there is something uniquely chilling about mass shootings that captures the country like nothing else. The notion that you're more likely to be randomly shot and killed by an anonymous mass murderer in this country than any other country on earth, of course excluding Yemen, is a hard pill to swallow in this nation.
But so far, we've been a country with a lot of mass shootings and very little agreement about what can and will be done about it.
Well, maybe that will change. In a press conference in the wake of the 2 recent shootings, Donald Trump called for new social media radicalization detection tools. He called for reducing violent video games, new mental health reforms, and red flag laws, which are aimed at taking weapons away from potentially dangerous people by court order, as well as a speedier death penalty for mass shooters.
On Monday, Trump tweeted, "We cannot let those killed in El Paso, Texas, and Dayton, Ohio die in vain. Likewise, for those so seriously wounded, we can never forget them, and those many who came before them. Republicans and Democrats must come together and get strong background checks, perhaps marrying this legislation with desperately needed immigration reform. We must have something good, if not great, come out of these 2 tragic events." Political horse trading aside, would strong background checks help? Would they just be a band-aid with voices calling for assault weapons bans, ammo bans, magazines bans, accessory bans, even full-out national gun bans and repealing of the Second Amendment? What would work? Is there anything we can do as a united country to curtail or even end mass shootings?
Well, how do the people feel about it? While there is division from proposal to proposal along, you guessed it, partisan lines, the majority of Americans, including a majority of conservatives, support expanding gun control in one form or another.
People on the left say,
gun violence is bad and ending gun violence takes precedence over gun rights. While people on the right say,
we're willing to discuss potential options that will end mass shootings, but we won't agree to things that are unconstitutional infringements of our rights, and we won't agree to things that aren't going to solve anything.
So that brings us to the question for this week. In the wake of recent mass shootings, how do Donald Trump's proposals stack up against other proposals to address mass shootings? Well, I say if we are going to stay a gun nut country, we need to make sure that the guns are in the hands of the right gun nuts and not the wrong gun nuts.
And on the right, I'm skeptical that what liberals are proposing will work. And I think that it will take away critical rights that will endanger other lives that could be saved by guns. And so for these reasons, I'm not into most of these, although there are some that I'm willing to talk about.
All right, well, talk about it. I'm into it. Let's talk about it. After, of course, we drink. Yep. All right, let's do some vodka.
We just need to lubricate the talking hole.
Yeah, that's my motto.
Any good hole is best lubricated before use.
Cutting that. Hold on.
Sorry, I forgot I was talking to old dry hole Mike.
Shit, now I have to leave it in. Cheers.
Cheers to the sky, which God lives in. Brought to you by Scott Vodka.
God lives in the sky. That was doing my impression of that Simpsons character.
Which, was it Ralph Wiggum? Yeah, or was it supposed to be the voices of one of Ned Flanders' kids?
One of Ned Flanders' kids could have been any of them.
Who was probably voiced by the same voice actor, almost certain.
Yeah. So, are there policy solutions that can help reduce mass shootings? Yes. In fact, I even think that some of Trump's proposals could help. So the first thing I think we need to discuss before we discuss what can solve mass shootings is what is the cause of them? I think that radicalization of people and the normalization of mass shootings contribute significantly to them happening. So when it comes to radicalization, what is radicalizing people? Well, I think that on one hand, Donald Trump is right about one thing. I think the internet does allow extremists to network and silo their fucked up thoughts. There are places like 8chan where fucked up mental rabbit holes are the main attraction, but you can find extremism anywhere. Free speech is allowed online. You can find it on Twitter groups. You can find it on Facebook, Reddit. It's all over the place. In fact, a lot of these social media networks have people working full time just to try and flag extremist rhetoric. And it is a losing battle because the internet is so robust and people want so badly to be able to get online and talk about fucked up stuff that if you were to get rid of 8chan, right, there would be like a 16chan. So as long as the internet has a place that is a virtual town square, especially one where people can go and anonymously say things, you're going to have people going and saying fucked up things, and it's going to lead to siloing of thoughts. But it's not just the internet. I also believe that we have leadership figures who use otherizing and divisive language, not just Donald Trump, but Donald Trump specifically. He can call for an end to hate in his speech in the aftermath of El Paso and Ohio. But as long as he's also talking about Mexican invasions every other day, as long as he's also calling Latino immigrants rapists and murderers, and as long as he's laughing when his supporters suggest shooting immigrants, he's, to put it nicely, he's not doing the best job modeling his most recent advocacy. And not just political figures, though. We've got extreme news media that makes a living on extreme and divisive stories. From my side, of course, I look at Fox's continuing round-the-clock coverage of the ongoing, quote, Mexican invasion for an easy example. I mean, Fox News is Donald Trump's actual daily briefing. Talk about a silo. It's like a human centipede, only more disgusting. But it's not just the internet, Trump, and news media. It is all of us, right? We in this country have normalized mass shootings in our culture. We've all come to see them as part of American life. For people with extremist ideation and access to guns, mass murder seems more like a reasonable option every single day. And this isn't just my analysis. The killers themselves have been very clear on this. Manifesto after manifesto cites previous attacks as inspiration, including the El Paso shooter. The Norway guy inspired the Christchurch guy. The Christchurch guy inspired the El Paso guy. And the day after El Paso, a Florida man, of course, fucking Florida man, was arrested after calling in a threat to, quote, shoot up his local Walmart. And when asked by police why he wanted to shoot up the Walmart where his mom works, he said he was inspired by the El Paso shooting. News media knows how people are radicalized and violence is normalized. And you can tell they do not care by the way they select what they cover. President Obama had more attempts on his life than any previous president. And that shit did not make the news. Why didn't it? Because the news knows that reporting on this stuff literally makes it happen more often. And they're either not willing or not allowed to play with the life of a president the way that they willfully play with the lives of school kids and Walmart shoppers. So if the mass murder mentality is basically a toxic meme in our culture, how can we solve it with policy actions? Well, by banning all white men from gun ownership.
Sorry, you're a liberal, so I didn't think you were joking.
Wow.
Also, statistically speaking, I'm going to have to hand it to you. I mean,
that's a thing.
It is. I mean, it's not constitutional or viable. And trust me, this white man's not giving up his guns. But I'm just saying that I will admit the overwhelming majority of mass shooters are white men, and that's the record.
That's a thing. It's a thing for sure. But I'm just kidding about that. But while we try to change our culture, we can also take action. We can limit the means of would-be murderers. We see in the two countries where mass shootings are very frequent, Yemen and the United States, the common thread is the intersection of ideological extremism and availability of guns. But we also know that the vast majority of people with guns in our country are not mass murderers. In my opinion, the best way to prevent shootings before they happen is to keep guns away from extremists. And I have a whole laundry list of things that I think are actionable things that we can do to maintain some people's gun rights while trying to limit the risk posed by would-be mass shooters. Number one, we can require a federal gun registry. Number two, we can remove the loopholes that everyone's been talking about for years, like the 3-day loophole where if your background check isn't complete in 3 days, you can go ahead and buy whatever gun you want, no matter what your history is. We can institute longer waiting periods. According to the FBI, 85% of mass shooters take less than 5 months to plan an attack after they decide that they're going to attack. The majority of them take less than 2 months. The plurality of shooters buy their guns after they decide to attack, which means that they buy the guns and 2 months later they attack. So if we had a 6-month waiting period, that would potentially circumvent shootings. If we had a 1-year waiting period, even better, right?
That's the sound of my penis shrinking.
We can pass the universal background check bill that the House passed back in February. Mitch McConnell can stop cock blocking it in the Senate and it can go ahead and get done. We can institute red flag laws where someone who knows you can go before a judge and ask that your guns be taken away temporarily. Red flag laws would have prevented a bunch of these shootings. A growing number of states have red flag laws, and they seem to work based on studies. Donald Trump even is calling to do it nationally, and I am super duper down with that. Furthermore, we can meaningfully enforce the Gun Control Act and the Brady Bill. The Charleston Church shooter and the Sutherland Springs shooter should have failed their background checks and been denied weapons. The Dayton shooter was well known for compiling kill lists and rape lists in high school. Police were even involved, yet he never got red flagged before buying his shotgun, his AR-15, and his 100-round drum magazine. And by the way, as a final point, 100-round magazines should go the way of the bump stock. We should have learned that after Las Vegas. Now we have another 9 deaths and 24 people shot in 30 seconds to remind us that 100-round magazines do not belong in a civilian environment. And there's, of course, more to say, but I need a drink.
Me too.
All right. I want to hear how much you loved my argument, but first I want to drink.
All right.
Cheers to my argument.
It's going to definitely require drinks for me to say anything nice about what you said.
Cheers.
And if you wanted me to say something nice, you shouldn't have given me Fireball, because a bad drink doesn't make me say nice things.
No, we're going purist.
It's all shit tier tonight.
That's right. Sky vodka and Fireball whiskey. All right. What do you got to say?
So I just want to take a minute to rebut the fallacious arguments against Trump. Trump has repeatedly denounced extremism and white supremacy. The ties to him are fallacious, and any logic that ties mass shootings to him goes back to Democrats too, and then it becomes who's encouraging mass shootings more rather than, who's uniquely to blame. But Mike and I have agreed to leave that issue alone and focus more on solvency issues, because your social media feed is basically already wrecked from that debate about which political figure to blame. And,
true.
That also seemingly confirms to who you hated before the mass shooting anyway. But anyways, moving on.
Right.
It's not like anybody is like, oh, I used to like this politician before the mass shooting, but let me tell you now, like, the mass shooting has changed my opinion of them.
Right.
I think the media is responsible for mass shootings more than any other blamable person or sector of society.
Okay.
We've sort of already discussed this, but these are media crimes. Shooters feed on media attention, which is why they put out manifestos where the media can get at them, and in some cases email them to news outlets or tag them in social media. Mass shooters are at least equally a First Amendment abuse as much as they are an abuse of the Second Amendment, meaning that, right, like, the Second Amendment isn't intended to give you weapons so that you go out and murder people who are innocent. That's not the idea behind the Second Amendment. The First Amendment is not meant to give you free speech freedom so that you go out and yell fire in a crowded theater and watch people trample each other and, like, you laugh and go get popcorn and watch, right? Like, the ideas are that we have good principles and good things that we use with these freedoms, and that most of the time people do use these freedoms well. It's people who are abusing these freedoms that cause these problems, right? And there are all kinds of, we hear over and over again people who especially are immigrants from unfree countries who say, in my country we don't have this problem or that problem. But yeah, it's not a free country, right? And free countries have unique problems that you don't see in unfree countries. Yeah, you don't see mass shootings and, like certain types of crimes in Russia, but you don't see free and fair elections either. Same thing with Vietnam or like a lot of other countries. Look, the problem is that sick people all over the world are drawn to terrorism and suicidal attacks on soft targets, whether we're talking about Al-Qaeda, ISIS, white nationalists, Antifa, take your pick of like extreme ideologies. They exist all over the world in every country in some form or another. The answer then, now, and always will not to be promote their personal stories and ideology through extensive media coverage and glorification of them, because that's the only source of oxygen for the flame that is this phenomenon. Even if you think that there are other sources that go into this, the chief and totally dependent source of fuel for this fire is media coverage, in the hope that you, as the latest extremist, whether you're a piece of shit for Al-Qaeda or a piece of shit in El Paso, that people will publish your manifesto and that they'll tear each other apart in the wake of the questions you propose and the policy challenges that you present. The entire incentive of mass shooters is to trigger that kind of media coverage and dialogue that create national partisan rancor in the wake of their terrorism. Sunday shooter being a leftist in response to a white nationalist on Saturday after the media and left selectively amplified him perfectly highlights this. Mike's own mention of media's explicit omission of coverage for attacks on President Obama affirms it. The media knows that their obsession or lack of attention thereof adds or withdraws fuel from this fire, and they knowingly add more. They have documents at the corporate level saying we are officially not going to report on this attack on the president from any administration because we know that it'll add fuel to the fire. But they don't give a fuck about knowingly turning that fire on us because they have bulletproof limousines and security guards. Outside of media reforming their act, I will say that I think that because they're the real only main source of the problem, if they're not going to change their act, these things are with us. I think if there were an objectively viable solution to this, we would have implemented it sometime between what is commonly regarded as the first mass shooting as a media phenomenon in 1966, when a guy climbed to the top of the bell tower at the University of Texas, and Columbine High School in 1999. Both sides of the partisan divide genuinely have no faith in the other side's solutions, and thus any solutions offered are truly subjective at best, even my own. I will admit that. My leftist friends don't just suddenly start wagging their head and going, yeah, I agree with you now, right? And I don't just suddenly start agreeing with them, even if they get mad.
I agree with you about the media.
Well,
but yeah.
But I mean, even then, I'd say that this level of agreement is rare among cross-partisan dialogues. And even then, we still have an enormous gulf. Every empiric of solvency on gun control has obvious confounders. Examples of other countries enacting gun control invariably yields countries that had low gun violence before and low gun violence after, and like Australia, the United Kingdom, all these countries that are cited as great examples of the success of gun control all have basically the same homicide rate before and after, more or less, and don't have very, very large, variances between. Whereas you have plenty of examples of countries that increase gun control and then see major shifts in homicides and gun violence before and after. Like, there are tons of countries like Brazil and Venezuela that have seen enormous spikes in gun crime and homicide after implementing gun control at the kind of massive level that our friends on the left are proposing. It's also worth noting that mass attackers in other countries have shifted to vehicle attacks, which means that gun control countries like the United Kingdom have simply moved the vehicle for mass attackers to a vehicle instead of from a gun, so they can still say that we have less gun crimes, but if we eliminate the people that are stabbed to death in the explosion of knife crimes in London and in the UK, and the people that are run down by cars, and that's why I said if you measure homicides, which are the objective measure, they're not really changing before and after gun control. And this goes back to the main problem, the idea of the mass attacker for promotion of ideology and or personal grievance is a global phenomenon. It manifests itself differently based on geography and like the subjective cultural differences based on geography, but the angry, loner, teenager or person in his early 20s, usually almost always a guy from Nebraska, is not that psychologically different from the Sunni teenager in Erbil who suicide bombs a government facility for ISIS. The problem comes from the nebulous and totally subjective debatable causes that make sick people glom onto extremist terrorist fantasies. Although the only common thread really seems to be misogyny, but otherwise I'll leave it outside of the debate. And this theory has an obvious confounder too in the fact that the small number, but real number of female mass shooters. But yeah, as we've said before, not so good for the white men.
Not good for white men.
Bad look for us. We're looking bad.
Yep. We are bad.
Looking like murderers. Domestic confounders exist, for gun control. Every state that practices gun control has nearby states with less effective gun control, which means that the Gilroy shooter was able to obtain the AR-15 from nearby Nevada, but that doesn't flatter nationwide proposals for gun control, as the U.S. has a neighbor in Mexico without effective gun control and a massive open border. And this means no solvency for national gun control for this reason either, especially in a world where Democrats refuse to allow any scenario with effective border security. I am skeptical of the viability of Trump's proposals, though. I hope this works without, especially when we're talking to red flag laws. I like to be optimistic. I would like to hope that it works without violating civil liberties and triggering lawsuits that cancel out its efficacy, but I strongly forecast that these red flag laws will be tied to multiple violations of Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights and will ultimately lead to them to being repealed by either legislatures or the courts. And this is, of course, if they're even enacted, as we've talked about earlier. What a red flag law means in the existing statutes from state to state is different, and what gets hammered out at the national level, if it is enacted, will be its own unique thing. So, I don't know. What do you think?
All right. I think I want a drink.
All right.
Cheers.
To not vomiting at karaoke.
Uh-oh. Fuck.
Nothing like Fireball flavored Sky from the same unwashed shot glass.
Even giving it a little Fireball flavor doesn't make Sky good. I tell you, Sky vodka's not the best vodka.
No.
Unless that is you want to endorse our show, Sky Vodka, in which case you'll be the official vodka of Right Brain, Left Brain.
In which case, Mike loves Sky.
All right, man.
And
Well,
Fireball, if you want to sponsor, I love Fireball. Let it be known, on our politics, we're firm and we stick with our principles. But on alcohol, we're whores.
it's true. All right, so I got a couple things to say about what Kurt said. Now, even though this is a debate show, there was some overlap between our speeches, right? We both implicate the media. And I think that that's an important thing that we should focus on because I think it really does matter. But we'll get to that later once we hit common ground. In the meantime, there's a couple things I want to tear Kurt up on. Kurt says that if we could have done anything between 1966 and Columbine, that we would have to prevent mass shootings. But the thing is we did quite a lot when it comes to guns between those times. 2 years after the Texas shooting, we passed the Gun Control Act of 1968. It was also after JFK, Martin Luther King, and Robert Kennedy were all shot within like a year and a half of each other. We passed the biggest gun control measure, I think, of American history. A little while later after that, we passed...
Which none of those stopped the assassination attempt on Reagan, but...
Well, no, and then there was the assassination attempt on Reagan, right? Which led to the
More
Brady
gun
Bill
control,
to let more gun control
That's when he
legislation.
swung very much in favor of gun control.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
After he
all
got
it takes
shot.
is getting shot, man. I tell you what. Then you're all about it.
What a wimp.
We passed the Brady Bill, right? And then there's even more, right? We passed the assault weapons ban in 1994, right? That lasted for 10 years. I'm not saying that all of these gun control measures were like perfect and a panacea and fixed mass violence. Of course not. There were still mass shootings during that time period. But the point I'm trying to make is when we see something that can be done, we should try to do it. We're always doing a cost benefit analysis when it comes to policy proposals. And I would argue that the Gun Control Act, the Brady Bill, and the assault weapons ban all did more good than harm. We can disagree maybe on the assault weapons ban or something.
I was going to say in response that I'm trying hard not to jump ahead to common ground with you.
Yeah.
Because, I really want to say to our listeners, we're on Twitter, we're on all these other things. Before we get into the studio and actually have a debate with each other, we're already worn out with being angry at people who disagree with us,
right.
and worn out at people being mad at us and being disrespectful to us just because we don't share their opinion on what's going to help. I will say that I agree with you. Literally, the assault weapons ban of 1994 is the only one that you don't love, that I don't like, and I will mention that of course Columbine famously happened after the 1994 assault weapons ban, and so you know what I mean, like there's plenty of room for both of us to just look in this genuinely and in good faith and say, okay, there's like tons of good examples of like we can come together on some things and other things we're not going to come to a consensus on.
And it's true, right? And that's where Kurt and I at this table are in many ways a microcosm of average people in this country who genuinely believe in some forms of gun control. We think it's reasonable to like, okay, well, limits should exist and requirements should exist. What are those limits? What are those requirements? We can argue all day about the finer points, but in general, we're like, yeah, let's promote as much freedom as we can and also try to keep people safe as best we can and strike the balance between those things. Because generally, we're good people in this country, including the vast majority of people who own guns. And it's important for me to constantly be reminding myself of that. Now, Kurt also talks about knife and vehicle attacks in like England, for example. I did a little bit of research on these kind of attacks because on one hand, I think Kurt's right. He's saying you don't have to have a gun. If you want to fucking go out and murder a bunch of people, you can find a way. You can go stab a bunch of people, right? And in Europe, there was this guy in a big ass truck that ran a bunch of people down on a bridge recently
among
as
a couple other mass vehicle attacks.
And stabbings, right?
A few of them in France and in the UK.
I can easily grant on one hand, you're right. If somebody decides like, you know what, fuck it, I'm going to go out and go in a blaze of glory and kill as many people as I can because for some reason that sounds like a good idea to me. They don't have to have an assault weapon. They don't even have to have a gun. They can go out and fucking stab. They can run people over with their car. They can make a pipe bomb. Like we've seen people doing this kind of stuff. My whole thing is those methods are less effective in general than a fucking AR with a 100-round drum, right? And I'm cooler with somebody coming at me with a knife than fucking shooting me with a fucking AR. I'm cooler with it. I think most people are.
Can I jump ahead and say that I agree with you that you're way more likely to survive a mass stabbing attack.
Right.
I'd say that it's debatable about your chances of getting a horrific injury, whatever. So even though they are arguably as deadly as gun attacks, I'd rather that there never be another vehicle attack again for us to compare.
Well, and what I'll grant you is that if we were to snap our fingers and confiscate all the guns tomorrow, we'd see a major rise in vehicle attacks.
Right.
And then we could have all the data in the world. There's no question.
I'm a data wonk, and I love data, but I wish that there was never a single more shred of data on any of this.
Yeah. Kurt also talks about the Gilroy festival shooter, where he says that, the Gilroy guy was able to go to Nevada to get his AR. And then even if Nevada banned ARs too, right? Or even if there was a national ban, well, there's Mexico, right? But the thing is that 90% of illegal guns in Mexico are manufactured and come from the United States, right? The gun smuggling.
Well, they like quality.
The gun smuggling between the U.S. and Mexico is actually going in the opposite direction. Plus, I would also rather a potential mass shooter here in the Bay Area have to go to Mexico or pay like $10,000 for a black market gun than just drive a few hundred miles to Reno to pick up their fucking gun from Walmart.
I guarantee you
right?
that an illegal weapon in Mexico doesn't cost $10,000. But you also have to... I'll grant that it's more difficult to do that than it is to drive to Nevada.
Right.
We can just agree that objectively those are the levels of gradation of challenge.
Yeah, but I also want to remind listeners that I'm not even talking about taking away existing guns on some large scale. Right. I have intentionally gone out of my way to not today, but, and not really ever. Right.
You did argue to ban the Second Amendment.
I argued to repeal the Second
By the
Amendment.
way, listen to our past episodes on the gun control debate, including should we repeal the Second Amendment?
Yeah, the Second Amendment episode was from June 6th of this year. It was an excellent episode. In that episode, I argued that if we were to repeal the Second Amendment, that wouldn't inherently take away anybody's guns. It would simply make it up to the states. Where if a state like Hawaii wanted to ban guns, they could do so. And if a state like Texas wanted fucking free range on guns, they could go for that as well. That would be my argument. Leave it up to the states. Now, we do have a couple other episodes on this topic, as we alluded to. The After the Parkland shooting, Can Anything Be Done episode from last year in February 22nd. There's still arguments there that are applicable, as well as the increasing restrictions on the AR-15 episode, where we specifically looked at that weapon, which was used in...
It was used in El Paso
and Ohio, actually. But a shorter pistol version of the AR was used in Ohio.
Okay, yeah.
With the 100-round drum.
I actually wasn't sure what was used in Ohio, and I believe that it was also used in Gilroy.
They love that fucking AR, dude.
It's a popular weapon.
Yeah, and that episode
it
about
would be
the
like
AR,
banning Ford Mustangs. Like Dicks love Ford Mustangs, but also some regular people also drive Ford Mustangs. But Dicks especially love Ford Mustangs.
Yeah. So the increasing restrictions on the AR episode is from January 4th of 2018. All of those episodes have arguments that apply to this debate. We're trying to avoid regurgitating those arguments, But at the end of the day, right, I'm trying to be reasonable here. I'm on the left. I'm saying, where can we as Americans really agree? I'm looking at the polls and I'm saying, what do conservatives want to do about gun regulations, right? I'm seeing that the majority of conservatives want red flag laws. I'm seeing that the majority of conservatives want a national registry database for all weapons. I'm saying if we're there with Republicans, the Democrats should stop saying we're going to do a mandatory fucking buyback of all assault. You know what I mean? Like, get out of here, Swalwell.
Right.
Let's take steps in that direction and see where we can stop taking steps, right? Let's take steps in that direction. Let's do the red flag thing, because I think that that's super promising, and see if that can help, you know? So yeah, I don't know, that's somewhat of a segue into common ground, but I know you have a couple things you want to hit back on too.
Well, yeah, I have areas where I can both agree with you and disagree with you at the same time before we move on to common ground.
But first,
let's drink.
Sure. Yeah. Double your alcohol to find out your proof. Double your arguments to get to the truth.
Oh, snap!
But we're doing Fireball, sorry.
Fucking goddamn. No saving this republic.
No saving this republic, he says. Cheers.
Cheers.
To the end of mass shootings.
I'll drink to that. All right. In response, I want to sort of flirt with common ground.
All right.
There are two different categories in which I place gun control policies that I still reject. A first category that is like policies that I think are unreasonable and an excessive infringements of rights that I could just never accept.
Like, take all the guns.
Yeah, like repeal the Second Amendment. The assault weapons ban. A lot of different proposals. Some of which we discussed tonight. Some in the that were for clarity I'm bringing up now. And then there's other categories that are policies that I dislike, but that I could live with if they were part of a compromise. Because where I'm coming from on this, it's like a lot of these policies, I'm skeptical of their solvency or whatever, or being an unfair infringement of rights, because like crime plummeted during the wave of new gun rights legislations in the 1990s, right? It was the biggest post-World War II liberalization of gun laws was in the 90s. And nonetheless, like the last 40 years has seen a restriction of gun rights at the local and federal level besides that. And legal gun owners have been repeatedly punished, whereas like criminals have been rewarded in a lot of circumstances over and over again. And if you believe in gun rights like I do, you see a strong link between how guns are the cause of defensive gun uses, of which there's many more defensive gun uses per year than there are homicides, right? And so this is part of the reason why, if you're like me, you support gun rights. And so some policies like longer waiting periods or more intense psychological review, depending on what that ends up being, are things that cons could talk about and agree to in theory as part of a compromise, depending again on the specifics, but only if they're coupled with expansions of gun rights like nationwide concealed carry. As I've said before, guns save more lives in this country than they take, and we're not willing to give up our rights in the face of criminals who won't give up their rights unless we get something out of it that mitigates the harm of being unarmed, right? What I mean by that is like, I think that I'm definitely giving up something that is an infringement of rights if I have to wait longer for my gun. But if you can give me something that will make me safer to make up for it, I can swallow it. And the people that you want to vet for concealed carry they're not the mass shooters, right? Most of the mass shooters, they don't have concealed carry licenses, because then you have to face an even higher standard. And if you wanted to make like an extremely high standard for concealed carry, like at that nationwide level, we're willing to talk about things like that. We're willing to talk about all kinds of ways that we can get more exhaustive with safety or other things. But if you just come at us like, you have to accept this loss of gun rights or you're a monster, and then that forces us to look at the specifics and look at how over and over again in gun control after gun control proposal, legal gun owners give up their rights and criminals are emboldened, then we say no. But if you're willing to talk to us about a compromise that gives us something for what we're giving up, then we're willing to talk to you. And I want all of my friends on the left to know that. If you're not talking about a zero-sum game, we can talk about a lot of different proposals. And I just want to say in response to the 100-round magazine argument, for example, that many of the states after the bump stock ban have not seen a single person turn in their bump stock. I believe it was Colorado that I was reading about the other day, that hadn't had a single person turn in a bump stock as required by law. This is the problem with any sweeping legislation on guns, and Mike and I were talking about how sweeping legislation on a nationwide level can only do so much. Enforcement is a big deal. So like when we're having a classic academic style debate, one of the main articulated components of an academic debate is enforcement. Like, how are you proposing to enforce this measure? And over again, when our friends on the left are like, but don't you want people not to die? Like, they're just not paying attention to the enforcement mechanisms of their different proposals.
Well, let me talk about that a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about the bump stocks thing. Even if it's true that there are states, for example, Colorado or something, where not a single person has turned in their bump stock. Nobody has bought a bump stock since the ban went into place. They're not manufacturing bump stocks anymore. So, and many people are turning in their bump stocks because they're law-abiding people, right? Every law has people that don't abide by the law. And you would be pissed off if we sent the Gestapo out going door to door searching houses for fucking bump stocks, right? So I think that in debate, we also talk about measures of solvency and cost-benefit analysis, even if it's not 100% perfect solvency, which it never will be when it comes to trying to stop violence or gun violence.
And in the interest of intellectual honesty, what has 100% solvency?
Yeah. even if it's not 100% solvency, if the advantages outweigh the disadvantages, right? In this case, it's to say not that there's a disadvantage to banning bump stocks, but that, the enforcement of banning them, if somebody doesn't bring them in, well, you're not going to go to their house and knock down the door, right? A couple things could solve that, actually, if we had a registry, right?
And one of the things that I've said is there's no way I'm going to support it. Now, however, bump stocks are a small enough thing that we can start there, and that you get enough conservatives agreeing with you that we can agree, and we can at least start to see your point on this, and say that at least for bump stocks, we can. At least this conservative who is rigidly pro-gun, much to the ire of many of my liberal friends, I can agree with you that at least for guns this works, and so that it's not that always that logic is untrue, but then when you multiply the complicating factors of expanding that to more things complicated than a bump stock.
I'm guessing you would be equally not that mad about 100-round drums.
I'd be willing to talk about 100-round drums.
Would you get out of bed at 9 a.m. on a Saturday to protest an all-out ban on 100-round drums?
Maybe.
9 a.m. on a Saturday?
But I might vote for somebody who says, in exchange for 100-round drums, you get concealed carry.
Well... we could. I mean, I don't know.
I'd
want to see the concealed carry requirements.
We don't have to agree. I'm just trying to talk to you here. I'm just saying that, now I'm to give you an example. Like, I'm willing to sacrifice bump stocks. I'm fine with them being banned. I would have to get a lot to give up 100-round mags. But then there's some of these other things which I'm more willing to discuss. Right, like. And for the record, I don't own 100-round magazines.
Yeah.
First of all, it's California, so it's not legal to have them here.
It's not legal to have them here. And most people that I've read that are into sport shooting hate 100-round drums anyway.
Well, here's the thing about shooting, and I can tell you this from being a shooter who was legally allowed to have extended capacity magazines because I was in the military. The higher the capacity of a magazine, the more jam-prone it is, because it's kind of a miracle that rounds come out of a magazine at all. And yeah, I just want to take a minute to talk about differing standards of free speech. Look, we all laugh, especially as people who are I reject the term millennial. I think I'm young Gen X, but I've often been called an elder millennial. And anyways, if you've been born after 1983 or maybe as after 1980, a lot of us in that age demographic are laughing at proposals to critique or regulate violent video games as a contributing factor towards mass shooter. But that, because we obviously get what's humorous or laughable about that. This is a clear First Amendment thing, and that whatever attraction that people have to violent video games as mass shooters is a tenuous thing where there's all kinds of violence in our culture and all kinds of attraction to sort of things that you're not supposed to fuck with. You're not going to mass shoot anybody. I know you're never going to do that, Mike. I know it. Out of a lot of people I've met, I know you'd never do it. You like a violent video game or two, right? And
yeah, I love them.
But that same attitude on free speech regulations should apply to Chans, right? The fact that mass shooters like Chans is like the fact that mass shooters like violent video games. It's just a thing that they like, that millions of people like, and the overwhelming majority of people have nothing to do with that. And the fact that you can cherry pick and isolate the extremism of that, and the fact that people will get on Xbox Live and say fucked up shit doesn't mean that it's okay, so shut down Xbox Live, right? And I can't help but notice that, it's very easy for people in politics to be yeah, let's go after these people who aren't mega corporations with no political contributions towards major political parties. And then be well, what about these other platforms like Instagram and Xbox Live and Facebook, Twitter? They're oh, well, they've donated to Democrats and Republicans, so that's just free speech, man.
Right. Yeah. Well, I have two things to say about video games and mass shooters. Number one is that there is no correlation whatsoever between an increased for violent video games among mass shooters as a demographic interest whatsoever. I read through the FBI's database about profiling mass shooters. They said that they actually have very, very little in common ideologically, but video games is certainly not one of those things. And number two is that we've had numerous studies about violent movies, violent song lyrics. Remember fucking Tipper Gore?
Yeah.
Violent video games. The studies have conclusively shown that there is no correlation whatsoever between playing violent video games and being ideated toward committing violence in the real world. There's just no correlation with it whatsoever. I thought that was the biggest part of Trump's thing, honestly, where I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? Because it was he read this speech that someone else clearly wrote that was very honestly like kind of this moderate Republican talking point kind of speech that even had a couple of like bones to toss to liberals, right? Let's do fucking red flags. Let's do a national fucking gun registry. And I'm like, all right, you're speaking my language a little bit here. Violent video games? What?
It's just he's got to have a throwback in there.
You just had a paragraph to burn?
They're like, well, we got an extra bullet point. the Microsoft Word, it makes three bullet points.
I can't format this bullet point out. Just put some violent video games. I don't know.
If you don't fucking put something in there, he's just going to start saying random shit, and it's going to make this somber moment seem all fucked up. So you don't want to hear him talking about Marianne Williamson or about how the polls actually say that he's ahead. Just put something in there. If you don't put something in the bullet point, it's over. We lose re-election. We have to find a new job next year.
Well, I got nothing negative to say about that characterization. I think that takes us right into common ground.
It does, but only after we drink.
Yeah. Obviously. Let's drink.
Looking up to the sky.
Oh, God.
You don't have to have sky if you don't want. I'll just.
No, I will. I'll suffer through it.
Why not have what you like?
Oh, my God. Don't pour mine that fucking
Give me your
son
glass.
of a bitch. Who let this guy pour the shots? Jesus Christ.
I can't see very well.
Yeah, you see well enough to stop before it overflows, but just barely.
Well, that's just instinct.
Cheers.
Cheers.
God, fucking damn it. Ugh. I tell you, Sky vodka's a lot better in a White Russian than it is out of a shot glass. Whew. All right, so let's hear it.
Well, let's talk about what we have in common. So I'm not going to go on too much about it, but one of the first things that it struck me before Mike even mentioned it in his own, I was like, I knew that as soon as Trump mentioned violent video games, like I gave Trump credit on Twitter. I said, like, this is one of Trump's better speeches, and it's exactly the kind of leadership that this country needs right now. But I did literally laugh out loud in his speech when he mentioned violent video games, and also when instead of Dayton talked about the violence in Toledo. Right. But
yeah, what are you gonna do? That's a low blow. I wouldn't even go after that shit.
And just as common ground on Trump and how he talks, like he's a chaos. Like I recently started to understand what he is, and I found out about this thing called chaos magic, and I realized that half my bosses in the Marine Corps are chaos magicians. And like it's just people who just start saying random shit that's so chaotic and upsetting that it throws everything into a tizzy, and then they try to sort of bring everything back together, and then somehow it's so horrific to deal with that it works. And is that not how he won the election?
I mean, he won, Hillary lost. Tomato.
I'm skeptical of a lot of the proposals out there about what can be done on the policy level, but I am optimistic. I would like to talk about it, and I'm willing to talk about and consider anything as long as people are willing to have genuine discussions, and that when, people come at me as like, I'm a scumbag if I don't just say, yeah, you're right. Like, I'm not gonna, but I love conversations about solvency and what we can do. And I'm optimistic that we can. And another point that I think that we agreed on is that the media has an enormous role voluntarily to play in this. So
yeah, absolutely. They're going to have to. Well, and that's one area of common ground where we're together, right? I talked about three things, right? I talked about the internet. I talked about public figures. And to an extent, I think you agree and disagree on both of those points. But one place that we really agree is with the media, the news media specifically. There's no question that, in my mind, the way I see it is it's just the normalization, constant normalization of this extreme reality where people are getting shot up here, there, and fucking everywhere. I mean, we had a mass shooting 80 miles, like a couple hours drive from my house. And it just was, and like I drive through Gilroy all the time.
Somebody I know who used to be an important part of my life was there with her two kids.
Yeah.
And her brother.
Yeah. My wife's parents go there most years and just happen to miss it this year. The fact that it is happening, there's people who really hammer in this like mass shootings are so rare. Why are we even talking about mass shootings?
Neil deGrasse Tyson, if he weren't a liberal, he would have been fucking burned alive because even his comrades on the left fucking burned him for his tweet about, oh, well, statistically speaking, it's not very, like, you can't even say that anymore.
Well, it's
people are done with that because there's like rare people like the group who survived the Route 91 Vegas shooting festival that Stephen Paddock did that, caused the bump stock ban, who went to the Gilroy Garlic Festival together to recover from that and were caught up in a second mass shooting.
Yeah, dude. even if it doesn't touch us all, it affects us all.
Yeah.
Right.
Because, and that's the thing we should also keep in mind is that it does affect us all rather than demonizing people who don't agree with us.
I completely agree with that. And we've talked about, this is one thing that we have talked about in previous episodes about guns that I think is just really, really important. I think it's especially important for me to say this to my friends on the left. Let's remember the majority of gun owning conservatives, the vast, vast majority of them are decent, law-abiding people who own guns because of they want to protect their families, they practice gun safety, they abide by the rules, they want to be prepared in the case of some tyranny or whatever it may be. Whether you appreciate their reasons or not, they're decent people. They're not going to fucking commit a mass shooting. And honestly, you hope that they're fucking nearby, like in Sutherland Springs,
right?
When the fucking guy came out with his gun and fucking started shooting at the guy with the other gun. Like, would I be happy if neither one of them had a gun? Yeah, I would be happy about that.
Right. But
if one of them's going to have a gun, I'm cool with a good guy having a gun. We need to remember that on the left, in a world with guns, good guys with guns. And it's not the end of the world,
And then let me say in response something that I'm immediately inspired to say, which is that I've had so many of my good friends, lifelong friends, who are just being totally out of line because I don't agree with them on gun control, and it's not called for, and it makes me hardened. And yet at the same time, like, I have to remind myself that even though these people are being personally out of line, people who propose gun control are not like, oh yeah, I can't wait to have statism so I can impose a tyranny. You know what I mean? Like, people on the left who propose gun control have they tend to be less familiar with guns, and as a result, they tend to see these things as weapons of war. As somebody who used to be a liberal, who used to have that viewpoint, I can forget it sometimes, but it's part of the reason why I'm able to avoid falling into the conservative trap of being like, oh, these liberals want to just take away our rights, is because if I think hard enough, I can remember back to the time when I used to feel that way, and it was especially because I was less exposed to guns, I was like, why would we allow this? And even if it develops into a rancor that's uncalled for, we have to remember that our friends on the left are coming from a place where they are fed up with murder. And murder is something that I relate to getting fed up with.
Yeah, yeah. I am cool with being that country with tons of guns if we're that country with tons of guns with really low gun violence. And I think that conservatives also want to be that country with lots of guns and really low gun violence.
Right? Because we pride ourselves on the fact that states like Arizona and, places in quote-unquote red state America have high gun ownership, low gun violence. That's the thing that we always regress back to. And so as long as we're not there, then everything is not all right.
Yeah.
And then we should at least be talking. And I think that the last thing that we can say in common ground and then sort of wrap things up from here, mass shootings and unacceptable displays of murder are definitely guaranteed going to continue if we are rancorous and torn apart by the action and rhetoric against each other that these shooters intend for us to have in the wake of their shootings.
Yeah, it's fucked up. When a shooting happens, the majority of fighting that happens is between people who don't like mass shootings. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, exactly, right? Like the best way to thwart these mass shooters is to come together against them, and instead we're falling apart along too often the lines that they would expressly wish.
Yeah, man. Conservatives and liberals need to fucking seriously link arms on this one.
Right.
Like, we really do. So at the end of the day, I will do the symbolic linking of arms with my comrade and compatriot across the table.
The linking of livers.
As we
joined in liver damage, so reduced in capacity that we only have one working liver between us.
As we raise a glass to our common mission of uniting people with common values and ideals. So thank you so much for listening.
Find us on social media. On Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, you can find Mike as Left Brain Mike.
And Kurt as Right Brain Kurt.
The show's got accounts too, RBLB Pod.
And as always, share, comment, like, and review Right Brain, Left Brain.
And until next week, don't keep your messiest spaghetti in your most fragile jar on your most overstuffed shelf in the fridge. But if you do, resist the urge to fit one more thing into that drawer or shelf because, man, it's really hard to clean up broken glass mixed with spaghetti.
And if you're going to go floating down the river on a 4-hour journey on an inner tube, bring more than a water bottle filled with homemade White Russian. You might want to bring a water bottle filled with, I don't know, water. So until next week,
I'm Right Brain Kurt.
I'm Left Brain Mike.
Later.
Bye.
So Right Brain, Left Brain is a show. It's a show made by Mike Epley and Kurt Wagner.
That's true. It's also produced by Nicholas Bernardi.
The graphics are done by Bianca Crompton. Thank you so much for the business cards, Bianca.
It's Crampton, but she doesn't listen, so it's fine. And of course, the Right Brain, Left Brain theme is by Dysonauer. Find them on Spotify, Dysonauer. Bye.